What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q from Retro Q Gamer, back at it as always. And here we are with our final episode of 2019 with our Quack Experimental Podcast. That's right, episode 38. Not 38, but episode 38. And, well, we've a few, I stress few, small amount of topics today. And believe it or not, it's going to be a pretty Nintendo Switch heavy one today. But no, it's not exclusively with that stuff, because naturally anyone who does anything exclusive on the Switch is in for a bad time. But anyway, let's get going. First off, we have some sad news, not relating to the Switch, because this game probably wouldn't come to the Switch anyway. Xenosaga. Xenosaga is a bunch of RPGs, JRPGs to be specific, back on the PS2 mainly. And of course, it kind of spawned as a spiritual successor to Xenogears, and then Xenoblade Chronicles and whatnot, and as we know it, was a spiritual successor to the Xenosaga series. So Bandai Namco retains all the rights to the Xenosaga series, the trilogy on the PS2. They all have like weird German subtitle names, so I'm not going to even try to get into them. Now, the PS2 trilogy, some of which were never released in certain regions around the world and whatnot, according to Bandai Namco's general manager, I'll probably butcher this guy's name, but Katsuhiro Harada, he went in on Twitter and he let everyone know, while someone was asking, that a potential Xenosaga HD Trilogy collection was being discussed internally. Now, that's something that many people have been asking for, myself included, and even, I believe it was maybe last year or the year before, there was a trademark file that kind of hinted that they were potentially working on it or potentially looking at it as a viable option. Now, it progressed a little bit internally as well. In fact, it went all the way to the possible remaster consideration planning stage, but it failed an internal profitable market analysis. Now, we don't know what the specifics about that were. We don't know what their gauge was. We don't know what their target was. We don't know what their percentages were. We don't know any of that. We don't know if they wanted to sell a certain amount of copies or a certain amount of profit versus how much they would have had to do to remaster it. Especially considering that some of these games were never released in certain regions, so some of them would require localization and translation. So that could be a bit of a problem, especially when it comes to cost and whatnot too. So he said that this whole thing, because it failed the internal profitable market analysis, is that it's going to be very difficult to resurface, which is very, very unfortunate, because now we're pretty much guaranteed that, at least in the next couple of years, if all of this is legit, we won't have a Xenosaga HD Trilogy collection. Who knows, maybe we'll get it in 10 years from now. I don't know. Just dump the originals on Steam for cheap and we'll play them. Just do it. But it kills me to hear stuff like this. Just like when there's all those old games you like from, in this case, the PS2 era, and you just can't properly play them in the modern way, the way you want. Sure, some of them get questionable HD remasters and ports and whatnot, like Silent Hill 2, for example, Silent Hill 3 as well, I guess. And then you've stuff like Resident Evil Code Veronica. But then you have stuff like this as well. And especially when it comes to JRPGs from the PS2 era, just the 6th generation in general, really. There were so many leftover ones and overlooked ones that just haven't resurfaced. And that's such a shame. Especially considering that the JRPG genre has been in such a big resurgence and just a big push the last couple of years. But high-profile games like Dragon Quest XI, Persona 5, and there's a bunch of others as well. But big ones like that have really returned focus and shone the light back on it too. So it's a shame that Xenosaga in this modern era just won't happen. Who knows? Maybe just give us a .hack signed quadrilogy HD collection. I'd buy that. I'd buy that in a second. Now, next up, I want to talk a little bit about a topic that, while we don't have 100% official information on it too, I'm going to use common sense and logic based on what I know about this and based on what it actually is. And, well, being a tech guy, it's going to really, really help. And this is a feature coming from the upcoming Xbox. Now, this one is what they're highly touting as their patented VRS system. If you don't know what that means, it's is it VSR or No, I think it's VRS. Variable rate shaders, or is it variable shader rate? I think it's variable rate shaders. But essentially, what it allows it to do, I'm going to just use this and dumb it down as easy as possible, is it allows the console to change the level of shader quality and the level of shading and the level of shadows and whatnot on the fly, depending on how the system is performing and the frame rate target and the resolution target and the quality target set by the games and whatnot. But overall, it basically lets it do that on the fly in order to, I don't know, maybe keep better resolution, keep better frame rate, keep better quality elsewhere. We don't 100% know just yet. Now, everyone's touting this as like, Xbox is going to be the best thing ever. It can do VSR, VRS, whatever the fuck it's called. But you know what this is? This is dynamic resolution for one of your settings. Variable rate shading is probably not going to be a good thing. Variable rate shading is basically saying, hey, we have systems in place to account for and offset the inevitable performance issues. That's what this reads to me. I don't like hearing that a console or that a piece of hardware or a piece of software can adjust itself on the fly to lower quality. No. I want to set it to ultra for a reason and play that. So this will all tie into our next little segment now in a minute, but it just goes to show that marketing, spin, and hype, for some people, they just don't use their brains. They're just completely out of control. Now, there could be more secrets to it that we just don't know yet. There's basically no information out there. But when you think about it, variable rate shading, it's just not a good thing. As the name suggests, it's definitely not a good thing. I don't like variables when it comes to quality. I like absolutes. I'm a Sith Lord. I deal in these things. That's why I am the best ever, and I'm better than you, and that's why I'm a PC gamer. But anyway, let's move on. But next up, we have the saltiest Fanboys topic. Now, this is a wide one to unpack, but we'll delve into every little detail about it here. This one mainly stems from, well, the internet. I can't say it stems from YouTube, simply because I just cannot watch videos like that when it comes to YouTube anymore. But I see an absolute ton of it all over Twitter, on comment sections, on individual platform websites, on multi-platform websites. I see it in other places like Discord and whatnot too. This is rampant and out of control. I've mentioned this multiple times before, but they break into three different camps. We have the Xbox camp from Microsoft. Now the Xbots, as they're sometimes called, but the fanboys, they were always bad. But after the Xbox announcement, they're even worse. Over the last couple of weeks, they've, like I said, they were always bad. But they were just, it's ridiculous. There's people talking, they're taking no info whatsoever, no source whatsoever, and they're just running with it. They're talking about all the stuff they have no idea what they're talking about. And of course, you have all the idiot fanboys that are hanging off all of that and going with the propaganda and whatnot. And there's just, it gets so bad at some points that they blindly defend flops and failure. Let me give you a quick example. I can't remember if it was Crackdown 3 or if it was State of Decay or maybe one of Microsoft. I think it might have been Crackdown. But there were no positive media outlet reviews. So Microsoft took to retweeting and endorsing fanboy reviews that basically said the game was perfect, 10 out of 10, and didn't have a single zero fault whatsoever. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Now, it's kind of understandable because Xbots have been taking L's for this entire generation daily. They've been taking them for, 6 years at this point, and they're probably going to take them for at least another year, and maybe even beyond. Maybe even another generation. But then we have the PS4 fanboys, or some people call them the Sony ponies. I don't get that one at all. I mean, Xbots at least makes sense, but the Sony ponies, is it just because it rhymes? Are you that fucking uncreative? Jesus Christ, that's bad. It's probably the worst one, actually. Actually, that is, out of all three of these colloquial names, the Sony pony is the worst one. Now, they were always bad as well, but they were the least bad and least offensive ones, typically. Because they basically just went, oh, everything exclusive is 69 out of 10, no matter what it is. Even if it's Days Gone, which is a shit game and has a massive downgrade, 69 out of 10 regardless. So that's just laughable. That's just absolutely laughable. But again, there's not much I can say against the PS4 fanboys outside of just the basic fanboyism like that. The Nintendrones are probably still the worst. I do feel like Xbot and Nintendrone, especially Nintendrone, are probably the two most apt and appropriate name, and definitely. But the Nintendrones are the worst. They've been the worst for about 4 generations at this point, ever since the N64, GameCube, Wii U, Switch. I'm going to still count it as 4 because technically the Switch is the 9th generation of console and the PS4, Xbox One, and Wii U are 8th generation. But yeah, this still applies anyway. But they're still just the absolute worst. The port begging is off the chain. It's ridiculous. There's more port begging than actual playing of games. But it gets so much better because of their almost unique situation of underpowered terrible hardware. Because they're port begging for all of these things that they will never get because of the huge power gap. And that's why they remain king. Persona 5, Monster Hunter World, Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, all the Borderlands games, they're especially salty and especially butthurt and anally devastated over GTA 5, something which Nintendo fanboy YouTubers and just some terrible YouTubers in general have swore to you that it was an absolute lock and basically confirmed for not only the Switch, which, by the way, spoiler alert, nearly 3 years later, it still isn't out on it or confirmed, and probably never will be, hopefully never will be. They also said it was a lock and guarantee for the Wii U. These people are fucking retards. But at the same time, you also have another one that's super triggering for them. Not Persona 5 or Monster Hunter World, we've already covered those, although those were pretty bad in regards to how much it triggered them off. But the Final Fantasy VII Remake is another one as well. Reminds me, it's kind of reminiscent of Final Fantasy 15 when that one was doing it too. But pretty much every new game really is the big one. But it warms my cold, dead little heart that they have to suffer like this, that they're an absolute afterthought, like the plebs that they are, that they are second-class citizens. They're not even second-class citizens, because a second-class citizen would be like maybe an Xbox player. First-class citizen, of course, would be the PC. Then the second-class citizen would be something like the PS4, because the games will get better optimized for the PS4 and PS4 Pro, when it comes to consoles at least anyway, because more people have them, and more people will play them. And then, of course, the third-class citizens will be the Xbox players, because, well, it runs on very similar hardware and architecture to the PlayStation. So it's very, very similar in that regard. And they might not get as much optimization, a little bit less power if they're not using an Xbox One X. But then there's a fourth place. Fourth place. Can't even say fourth place first Japanese company. Woo lad, that's bad. But I want to say one extra little thing about the salty fanboys before I round out this topic. Another thing, I can't even say the thing because it's just another thing when it comes to the Nintendo ones. Their whole argument for, oh, well, maybe we'll get a late port or whatever. Their whole argument, and they see this as a legitimate argument and a legitimate reason and okay and not something to be criticized. They think this is standard business fare and business practice. Their first go-to, Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 are the big prime examples of this. But their first go-to is, oh, well, maybe on the Switch Pro. Something that does not exist. Something that will likely never exist. They are hinging all of their benefits and all of everything, all of their late ports, their downgraded late ports, on a potential mid-gen refresh upgrade. Something that, as I've theorized in the past, the only way a Switch Pro, if you will, could and should work would be if they removed the Switch feature of it and just make it a dedicated home console version. But Q, you say as a fanboy in the comment section below, they would never do that. They would never remove the Switch aspect of the Switch. It would defeat the purpose of the Switch. Oh, me, the intellectual, as I would reply to you right now because you're not worth my keyboard time to type it out, you mean like they did with the Switch Lite, where they took out the dockability and video output, the ability to connect it to the TV and play it to that, the inability to switch your Switch Lite? Yeah, I didn't fucking think so. But not only are they hinging it all on the Switch Pro vaporware argument, but they also think they don't see why this next thing I'm about to say, they don't see why this is a problem, why this is negative, or why this is anything that should be criticized. They just lap it up because they're, well, Nintendrones. They are looking forward, or at least they're claiming to look forward, to games like Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 3 Remake, whatever, ported to their next generation console several years down the line. That's right. Imagine, what are we? The end of 2019. No, you know what? Let's use Cyberpunk 2077 as an example. Cyberpunk 2077 is out in April of 2020. The Nintendrones, as they do, would just sit around saying, oh yeah, I can't wait to play that in 2024 when it comes to whatever succeeds the Switch. You don't see the problem with that? Are you serious? These people are actually brain damaged. They are the worst thing in gaming. The absolute worst thing in gaming. I hate them so much. And this entire segment is arguably no one's fault but my own. And I have pretty much no one to blame but my own. Because when I'm scrolling through Twitter, I see a little bit of this. I see maybe 5 or 10% of everything I see. Everything of these fanboy situations, I see just regular scrolling. But then sometimes I get bored and I can't help myself and I go looking for it. And I get a great laugh out of it. But the levels of idiocy and stupidity are truly off the chain at these grown men, grown women, whoever it is, their willingness to just corporate slave themselves away over a piece of plastic because it hurts their feelings or boosts their ego or bruises their ego so much. But anyway, for 2020, I'm going to try to stay away from this as much as possible, just because eventually the laughter turns to disgust. Well, the laughter and disgust more so turn to something else. And that's something I don't want to be associated with. Now, you could almost argue this next topic we're going to talk about is a little bit of an insult against the fanboy topic as well, because this is some of their ammo, if you will. But no, I want to share with one of my theories about a technological development of some sort, if you will, specifically relating to the Switch game cards. Now, of course, as you know, the game cards, which are small, minuscule in size, storage capacity size, and they force downloads of the main parts of games in many, many situations. And not only that, but sometimes you have multi-game collections with only one game on the card and the rest are just forced to be downloaded because these game cards are so small. They're available in 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 gig capacities. There's also a 32 gig capacity, although that is very rare, and as I recall, at least anyway, there are currently only 2 games that use a 32 gigabyte game card. Now, having said all that, Originally, you might remember there was talk, official confirmation and whatnot from Nintendo that there would eventually be 64 gigabyte game cards. Now, this was quietly originally delayed in 2017 when the Switch actually launched. Very, very shortly after the Switch actually launched, it was delayed to 2018. Then, not a single word from Nintendo or anyone in 2018, so naturally it just slipped to 2019. Here we are 2 days before the end of 2019, and of course we have still no word or no confirmation or no update in any way, shape, or form from 64 gig cards and their availability, their price, etc. from Nintendo. So, going into 2020, people, naturally fanboys or Nintendo drones, are still clinging to, oh, it's coming soon, it's definitely going to be here in 2020. Now, my theory is that it's very realistic and most likely that Nintendo could completely scrap the idea of 64 gigabyte game cards just entirely. Because there's a multitude of reasons why they could do this. There's absolutely no need for these game cards outside a very, very, very significantly small few releases. Now, when I say very, very significantly small few releases, by the end of the Switch generation, you'd probably have 2, maybe 5 games that would require a 64 gigabyte game card. It's just madness. There's so very few games. Like I said, as far as I'm aware, there's only 2 games at the moment that use 32 gigabyte cards, let alone something that would go over it. Even collections typically don't go over 32 gigabytes. Now, of course, someone will probably point one out, as I stress one, because there's probably no more or something like that. But it's just such a niche size and niche capacity in relation to the Switch, since all the audio and all the textures in pretty much every game on the Switch are laughably low quality and low resolution. It really, really shrinks down the file size. There's no real need for big game cards. No games that come to the Switch, meaning, of course, no modern games, none of them need these. Not to mention the price. Publishers are already using small cards, smaller cards than they should, smaller cards than they have to. Not even 32 gigabyte cards when a game is maybe 20 gigabytes. Why? Because of price, because of costs. Proprietary media like this is manufactured in significantly smaller quantities than the likes of Blu-rays. I'm using them as an example, not as a comparison or a suggestion that Nintendo would put a Blu-ray drive in a Nintendo Switch. But because they're made in such smaller quantities, and because of the nature of the hardware and what they're actually made of, they're significantly more expensive. This cost has to go somewhere. Nintendo typically puts this cost onto the publishers, which means they will typically buy smaller cards and force people to download stuff and download large portions, chunks, features, and whatever of their game. Instead of, although some games companies and games developers and publishers will opt for one of the bigger cards, one of the more expensive cards, and they will pass the extra additional cost onto the consumer, which is a whole different problem within itself. So now, obviously 32 gigabyte cards are historically at this point cost prohibitive for this whole situation. 64 gig cards would be even more expensive. So games could either cost significantly more or skip the physical releases altogether, or just go back to do what they do and, just force you to download other parts of the game with a smaller card instead. Because like several games out there at the moment, they were going to completely forego a physical release, maybe in certain regions, except for in some cases Nintendo really, really wanted these games on the system in a physical form, and they wanted the games on the shelves and whatnot, and they stepped in to publish it themselves. High profile games like Doom 2016, Skyrim, Dark Souls Remastered, although I hesitate to call it remastered. But all of these games, and even some more, in Europe and even in some other regions for certain games, were going to have no physical edition whatsoever, because the publishers didn't want to step in for the smaller amount of copies they would have needed and whatnot, and the price of the game cards and all that. But Nintendo had stepped in and said, we will take on the publishing for this, which means that Nintendo, at all the cost of the game cards, they didn't have to pay any of the extra royalties and whatnot too, and you see where this kind of saved them a little bit in that way, in you could go with in cost, I guess, but it also helps them to just have it on there too. But there's a few other issues, if you will, when it comes to all of this. Because as far as I know, there's only 2 games, I've mentioned this a few times in this topic, but there's only 2 games that I know of that currently use 32 gigabyte cards. One of them is Dragon Quest Heroes bundle, the Dragon Quest Heroes 1 and 2, which launched on the Switch on launch day, and was, let me just as a quick reminder for everyone, that's right, a game on launch day was too big for the internal memory of the Switch if you didn't have a physical edition. Think about that. Too big for the internal memory supplied with the console. And the other is the PS2 quality port of The Witcher 3. Because, Jesus Christ, that's one of the worst looking games I've ever seen ported on the Switch. But anyway, there are several other collections and whatnot that would come down to possibly in around the 32 gigabyte mark if they weren't all forcing downloads. Devil May Cry Trilogy is a perfect example of this. Currently, it's only available listed for the Japanese market. I don't remember if it's just the Japanese version or the Asian version, but it has one game, Devil May Cry 1, on the card, and Devil May Cry 2 and 3 are just forced downloads. So something in that situation, maybe they have a 32 gigabyte card, they fit all 3 games on there. But again, price. Think of all of this. The price. This is already more expensive than every other platform and worse in every objective way. And then it's more expensive as it is. So I'm just going to end it out with this. I do believe that it is very, very real possibility, and I could foresee it happening. I am going to go with it's more likely than not that Nintendo will scrap their plans for 64 gigabyte game cards for the Nintendo Switch. Remember, people, proprietary media is bad. Just ask the Vita. But let's shift it away for a second and we'll talk about Nintendo winning an award, because we all know that winning awards is typically something to be celebrated, and, well, it's a joyous and prestigious and proud moment for many companies when they win one of these awards. Unless, of course, you're maybe EA winning Worst Company in America twice years running, and yeah, that's pretty brutal. But now I guess Nintendo joins that tier. They may not be winning the Worst Company in America, but they're joining one of the Razzies, if you will, because the French Consumer Association has awarded Nintendo, specifically the Switch, as the most fragile product of 2019. Ha! Yeah, that's what I say. I laugh derisively at the Switch in that regard. And it's specifically related to the Joy-Con drift, which tickles me in ways that I probably can't talk about on camera, but it's pretty fucking damn hilarious. Now, overall, the Nintendo Switch's construction is absolute shite. The build quality is absolute shite. From the cracking air vent plastic, randomly bending switches, easily scratching plastic screen, Joy-Con drift, connectivity issues, all of that. Well, there's a reason why the Nintendo Switch is the French Consumer Association's most fragile product of 2019. It's especially funny, considering that how worried everyone was about the Joy-Con drift and the potential for it to hit the Switch Lite. Especially because with the Switch Lite, you would have to send off your entire unit, not just disconnect the Joy-Cons and send those off. Well, guess what? You might remember that when the Switch Lite launched, there was 1 day later, that's right, 1 day later, the first reported cases of Switch Lite Joy-Con drift were happening. Makes me feel so damn good to see these companies, no matter who they are, in this case it's Nintendo, to see these companies get called out on their cheap Chinese knockoff bullshit quality bullshit. Feels good, man. But next up, I want to break it down for a second. I want to keep it real. I want to talk about something important. And that is retro collecting. Now, as everyone knows, I'm a huge retro gamer, a huge retro collector. But I've put my retro collecting on hold for 2019, with the exception of one thing. I believe the last major proper purchase I had for retro collecting was in December of 2019. I bought, depending on what way you look at it and what you want to count as my final one, it was either Soul Blazer, an English PAL copy of Soul Blazer, which there were only 2 countries that had them, so naturally there were a very small amount of units made. I got one of those, or technically like 2 weeks later, I bought a big batch of the hard plastic game case sleeves, the ones you could say put over your Super Nintendo games, your Game Boy games, stuff like that, just to keep them safe. I consider Soul Blazer the last one true big purchase. Throughout this year, I've been very good at it when it came to staying away from retro stuff. Throughout the entirety of 2019, I never once looked at retro stuff online. I never once looked at retro stuff in stores. In fact, almost every day I used to have to walk by a store that sold retro stuff in its window in order to get to work. I never even stopped to look in the window. I never glanced at it while walking by. I was very, very good at it. That lasted for about 6 months. I had one momentary lapse. I bought a Sony PVM. It was amazing and it was absolutely worth it. But since those last 6 months or whatever it is since I bought them, I haven't even looked at retro in any way, shape, or form again. Now, while I had put all of this on hold for 2019, I figured I was planning to go back in 2020, and I was going to go back with a big bang. I'll be in Dublin visiting Comic-Con in March of 2020, and there's a couple of retro stores up there. So naturally, I was going to go big and go hard and go ham, as I do. You know, big baller, shot caller, everything I do is large. I was going to go big and just kind of return to retro collecting and all with a bang. And that was the plan. However, over the course of Christmas, over the last week or so, real life stuff has happened. I'm not going to get into any details about it, but real life stuff has happened, and it's made me realize that at this point, retro collecting is probably dead forever to me. Or I shouldn't say dead to me, because that makes it sound like, oh, it's dead to me, the worst thing ever. But it's probably pretty much dead. And that kills me to say that. I love retro games. I love playing retro games. I love talking about retro games. I even love buying and collecting retro games. But I now have to change that. And it's probably over forever. Now, of course, I'll probably buy a retro game here or then. I might get an urge to play something. But I'm talking, I might buy one solitary, probably even common, not super rare, super uncommon game, every 6 months or something like that. Maybe once a year. Maybe once every 4 years. Yeah, that's rough. That I have to do that. That I guess I could say that I don't want to do it, but I kind of have to do it. I pretty much have to do it, if you will. And I mean, there's so many memories when it comes to retro games. And I'm not going to stop talking about retro games. I'm not going to stop playing retro games. But there's so many, sentimental aspects of retro games as well. Ones that I have, ones that I still own. Be it just the quality of the game, how you remember it, what was happening in your real life, stuff like that around it. Let me give you a couple of examples. These are all fairly, I won't say recent, but a friend of mine, I remember back when I was first trying to finish Final Fantasy VII, the very first time I was trying to defeat the boss. Depending on what way you want to call it, last boss, not last boss. The true last boss is unlosable. You just win the fight. But in the last one where you can actually lose, basically, I was kind of stuck there for about a week. I was trying for days and days and days, and I just couldn't get any further. And I sat down, I grinded out for days and days and days, leveled up all my stuff, got everything to where I wanted it to be. And then one night I went in to try beat him. It was at something like maybe like 1:20 in the morning. Text my friend, I'm like, okay, going in to fight Sephiroth, 1:20 a.m. Then like 7 minutes later, I just text him again. It's like 1:27. The motherfucker is down. that kind of stuff. And it's good times, stuff like that. I mean, there's other stuff as well. I mean, the same friend actually, it comes up, Medieval. Not the remake on the PS4, but original Medieval. It was actually the last time I played original Medieval before the PS4 version. So it was still like 15 years ago or whenever it was. But I remember one night I was up just playing Medieval as I did, like 2 o'clock in the morning. And he just texted me. Same guy. He just said, dude, BBC Two, that's a channel here. It's like the live action Fist of the North Star film is on. So I just paused it, ran, and I just watched that shit. Because as you do, it was such cheese. It's one of those films, that it's just so good. But another one, for example, this is, I guess it's a little bit more recent. This one is probably only maybe 10, 12, 13 years old. Something like that anyway. But I remember, if anyone out there is familiar with Breath of Fire 3 and getting the ultimate sword for Ryu, the Goo King sword, you might remember that there's a very specific set of actions that all have a very low probability that you have to do in order to even attempt to get the Goo King sword. The Goo King sword was basically a myth for me and him for years and years and years. One night, I was grinding out on the PSP version of Breath of Fire 3. I was trying to get the Goo King sword to make the file 100% complete. Would have had everything else, all the important stuff to 100% the game. And eventually, at like 3 o'clock in the morning, I get a Goo King sword drop. I pick up my phone. I'm so excited. I'm absolutely elated. I pick up my phone, send him a text. It just says 3 words, all capitals. Goo, dot, king, dot, sword, dot. Then he texts me back like 5 minutes later. It's like, bro, it's 3 a.m. Fuck off. I'm sleeping. And I just text him back with something like, are you not entertained? Or like, be surprised, be happy for me. Something like that. I can't remember what it was. It was a long time ago and I was just so happy. But it's all stuff like that. Memories of both quality games, just in general. Final Fantasy VII, Legend of Dragoon, Vandal Hearts. There's so many others as well. As well as the stuff you can share with your friends, the memories you have that go alongside with them and stuff too. And the fact that I pretty much have to stop retro collecting. Yeah, it's not my most fun thing to have to do or my most fun choice to have to make. But it's one I have to make. But at least we can wrap it up with the best segment of every single week. The reason why everyone is here, obviously. Q, what's the deal? What's going on? What's going up? What's going down? What are you playing? Well, one word can answer that this week. Grandia. I am playing Grandia daily. And that's it. Daily Grandia. Because I finally want to finish that game. So many times I've started it. So many times I've played it. So many times I've got very, very far into it. Obviously I'm playing the PS2 or PS1 version. But I'd always get to somewhere on disc 2. And then something would come up or I'd stop or whatever it was. Thankfully, I am coming up to the last... In fact, I've passed the last bit I remember vividly. I may be misremembering or forgetting one or two things. Maybe something will come up a bit down the line of like, oh yeah, I remember this now. But there was one or two things that I do remember as like the very end of where I got to. And I'm there. So I'm finally progressing. And I'll finally beat Grandia. It'll be the first big notch on the whole retro kick that I want to go on for the next few months. And who knows, Grandia 2 is on there as well. There's a couple of other games as well, but Grandia 2 is definitely on that list. But we'll have to wait and see. But anyway, until then, that's it for our final episode 38 of our Quack Experimental Podcast for 2019. As always, I want to thank everyone for watching, for joining me on this descent into madness that is one of the reasons that I do this. But I'm here for all of that. So I want to thank everyone for watching, everyone for joining me, everyone for whatever it is. Let me know in the comments section below any thoughts, opinions, comments, feelings, or how badly I've offended and hurt you by not liking some of the blatantly obvious things wrong with the Switch. Let me know all of that good stuff in the comments section below. Have a good 2020. I'll be there as well, doing what I do. And remember, winners don't play switchboards.